All right, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Evan Hendershot. I'm part of the marketing team at ProTech, and today I'm really excited to introduce this session. And we're lucky to have Association Julie Sciullo and DelCor's Gretchen Steenstra with us today to share some of the insights about the world of data analytics and business intelligence. But before we dive in, I just have a few housekeeping items I want to cover, plus a little bit of information about ProTech AMS if you don't know us already. So at ProTech, we're an association management software vendor, and we leverage the Microsoft ecosystem, Azure Cloud, and Power Platform to help associations build stronger member relationships. And like Association Analytics, we also offer an intelligence solution developed using Microsoft Power BI. And that can help you with your association unlocking some new member insights, which you'll hear, I'm sure, more about today with Association Analytics. And before I hand things over, one final thing. Please note that all attendees will receive a recording of today's session. And if you have any questions, please use the questions box in GoToWebinar, and we'll get back to those at the end. So without further delay, I will turn things over to Julie and Gretchen.
All right, thank you, Evan, and welcome everybody to the data analytics journey. So we're going to talk a little bit about why you should get started, how to get there, and where to go from there with some great lessons learned and tips and tricks for you to try at home, probably literally at home. So here's me. I'm Julie Sciullo. I'm Chief Executive Officer at Association Analytics, and with me I have Gretchen, Strategic Consultant at DelCor.
Hello.
So really quick, why you maybe want to listen to us, maybe not. Hopefully we can all share stories. Please feel free to chat with each other. We might call out some questions that you guys can share in the chat. Oftentimes you can learn just as much from each other as you can from us. So really quickly, who is Association Analytics and kind of why are we here with ProTech and DelCor? We are located in Arlington, Virginia. I think the most important part of this is we have an out-of-the-box integration with ProTech for our data and analytics platform, Acumen. We've been doing this for a really long time, and we're hoping to give you some tricks and tips today to bring you along in your data and analytics journey. And Gretchen, want to share a little bit about DelCor?
And we are here. DelCor does a lot of things similar to Association Analytics, but we're located, our physical office is in Silver Spring, Maryland, but we're all distributed right now. And we are technology matchmakers in many cases, and so we help associations find the technology that works best for them. And we have had a long, really good relationship with ProTech, and several of our clients are happy customers. So that's DelCor. Exciting wheel of services there.
Great. So today, real quick run through of where we're going to go. We're going to start with the Analytics 101 and kind of build from there. So no matter where you are in your journey, you'll be able to grasp on and hopefully take something away from today. We're going to dive into actually solving a few problems with data and what that looks like, and then get into predictive analytics and kind of the more advanced analytics that you can perform to really get insights out of your data. That's really what we're trying to do, is not just put together pretty things, but how do you pull insights and action out of that, like many of our customers and ProTech customers are already doing, to really give you real-time value. And then, of course, questions, please feel free to jump in anytime and ask questions throughout. So Analytics 101. Gretchen, you want to take us through the pool?
All right. So are we going to start the poll now? So what we want to know is just what are some of the biggest challenges you have? These are the most common that we see all the time, but we're curious at this stage of people's use of analytics, where there's been a spike in the last year. What is your current challenge if you had to start ranking them? And this is multi-choice. So strategy and governance is one that, even if you have a baby one, is it meeting your needs? Is it growing with your organization? Are you still having a lot of trouble with manual reports and doing things by hand? Are email campaigns difficult and not, giving you the data that you need? Performance metrics is something everyone is really focused on now, especially as people's behavior is changing. And how are you monitoring your your consumers, whether they're join, renew, or register. So what do we see, Julie? That's kind of even. Interesting.
Yeah, and I would be curious too, depending on what part of the year you're taking this. We're still a little bit closer to the beginning of the year, of course, closing out Q1. There seems to be a lot of focus on data strategy and governance, and also manual report generation. And we've actually seen a huge uptick in this since the pandemic, because people are running reports and kind of mashing together data more frequently to keep a pulse on the changing environment and changing engagement and metrics that they do have within their association. So,
yeah. And I think people get worried about having a strategy. And that's something that is very daunting. Strategy and governance are big words. And when you read about it, it looks really intensive. And we can talk about this a little more later, but all of these things, you just need to pick somewhere to get started, which is why Julie and I just wanted to break this up into where are you now? Give yourself permission to just accept where you are, and then just pick 2 or 3 things and work on them and keep going. You don't have to do all these things at once, nor do we suggest that you do.
Yeah, so I did share the pool results, so people should be able to see them. I believe they go over on the right-hand side under pool. And you could see the highest one was the 58% lack of data governance and strategy. Pretty tightly clustered here, though, with the labor-intensive manual reports right after, insufficient performance metrics, and then declining membership and registration, and ineffective email campaigns right after that.
Yeah. All right.
Out. Is it back on to the presentation?
No, I still see the poll.
All right.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So I don't know how many people were able to follow Juan Sanchez and Tim Hopkins as they were talking about OKRs, outcomes and key results, but I think it's, especially now when people have a lot of information coming at them, it's really important to focus on outputs, not outcomes versus outputs. Outputs are all the things that you do. They're lists and lists of things, but unless they're actually hitting a target, it's important to look at some of the noise that you might have that you're dealing with. So if you have analytics without a plan, then it's not really helping you serve your goals. And a lot of people are very worried about having perfect data, and they get hung up on, we're getting closer, but we keep finding problems with our data. And we're going to talk about, when you're doing analytics, that's very different than a financial reconciliation where your data has to be perfect because it's banking information, or you need to know every single attendee so that they log in and can access material. When you're doing analytics, your data just has to be good enough. And that's a really uncomfortable position for a lot of people, but it will stop them from making progress.
Yeah, this is one we see often. And what we find is, an average data and analytics platform might get close to 90%, and that's on the really good side. And it depends too on the specifics of what the use is and what data you're using. That number can fluctuate. With Acumen, we get closer to the 99%. And we still get people hung up.
99, geez.
Yeah,
like, what's the average marketing? If you get a 20% return, then marketers consider that a win, and you're at 99.
We're over 99, but there's just that mentality sometimes that it's a record for record, needs to be a record for record match, and that's really not what you're looking for when you're looking for a trend or to get an insight out of something to make a decision.
And sometimes when people see something dropping or a low number, that's what you're talking about, Julie, it could be just because. It could be that it was bad timing, or people aren't interested, or it's just a very, very small population interested in something. So that's, again, where you're looking at, what is your outcome? Is it okay to have a low number of consumption? And that could be perfectly normal. But so you have to be careful about when you react to a piece of data that you see. When the data is talking to you, you have to understand what the data is trying to say. And then we think it's really important to have a small group of people in your organization who are focused on analytics. We really like to see cross-departmental groups of less than 10. This is not an all staff exercise, but people who really live in the data and who are willing to explore and challenge each other about what they're seeing. And we like to, if you have someone from finance and membership and marketing and the usual suspects together, it creates a very complementary group of people who have different points of view.
Yeah, and this is one that I think is missed sometimes. It's okay, we have all of our metrics together, we now have dashboards, we're now up and running, and now we have to do something about it. And the task force can look many different ways, but I think the most important thing is that you have one and that you meet regularly. And so there are a couple of different makeups, of course, of what that looks like. And then also using your analytics and your dashboards in your departmental meetings. And that's how you really start to entrench it into the culture. So I'd love to hear if anybody does have some sort of task force or committee. You can throw that in the chat, maybe tell us who's on that team. And usually, depending on size of organization, you likely don't have somebody dedicated to just data and analytics or even just report writing. And so it's really a makeup of different people that are curious, that, like Gretchen said, are entrenched in the data. They may sit in membership. And so there's no perfect makeup for a task force or a committee. It's all about knowing throughout your organization who those curious people are. Maybe somebody wants to learn some data and analytics skills, and that's a great person to really empower and in career growth as well.
Right, but even if you have the luxury of having a dedicated data analytics person, I think it's still important that they're hearing what businesses are doing. And the other two people that I think need to be on your task force is if you work with someone like Association Analytics, they're on your task force. And if you're a ProTech customer, the data providers, every once in a while, they should be special guests of your task force. So you're learning what your vendor partners are doing, and just because you forget, you get into a groove of a set of data that you're looking at, and then you forget to refresh it or ask your vendors what new things they're working on. So I think it's really important, not every time, but as a guest.
Yeah, agree. All right, so reporting versus analytics. And so this is another hang up that people get onto. So it's like reporting and analytics, they are both needed at an organization. So you might have reports that are coming from your operational and transactional systems, and you need those. That's how you're going to run your day-to-day. That's how you're going to pull things out of ProTech. Sorry, I had a visitor. That's how you're going to pull things out of ProTech, and it's absolutely critical to your day-to-day business. And then analytics is when you're combining all of that data and you're kind of looking at trends over time, or you're looking into the future with predictive analytics, running things like, which we'll talk a little bit about later. We don't have to get into all of the nerdy stuff, but when you're running linear regression models and financial modeling to give you a forward look into your data too. And so you need both. Both are critical. And it's really about learning when to go to which one.
Right. So Julie, at some point, someone is asking, in addition to using metrics, dashboards, internal information, what about external data with corporate sponsors? So when we get to that point, we can talk about that. It's a good point, though.
Absolutely.
But again, this is an output versus outcome too. Is analytics is really helping you look at your outcomes. Where are you going? What are you trying to hit?
Yeah. And this is just to show what an association tech stack might look like. Everybody's looks a little bit different. Sometimes people have 2, some people have 20. I would also say Excel spreadsheets are also a data source that many of us still have. And the idea is you want to pull all of this together to get this 360 view of your member. And if you could do that in as much real time as possible, that way you're not, the 48% of us that are spending a lot of time doing manual report generation, we get away from that activity and we get to what are we going to do about it, right? Because that's where you really start to make impact.
So Julie, is this a time where you see using corporate sponsor data or other data that's not a service provider? Do you ever pull that in?
Yeah, so third-party data can look a lot of different ways. And I guess it depends what industry you're in as well.
Right.
But yeah, it falls into this category. It needs to be pulled in, and we've seen a lot of ways that people are starting to monetize. So they might start with using it as a member benefit, right? And then from there, they figure out, okay, what's the appetite for this? Maybe we continue to give it to our members, and then we use that behind a paywall in order to give it to a larger constituent. One example is it was actually banking information, pull all of that in, ingest it. They actually started to pull it together with member data. Some of it was paid third-party data, some of it was free third-party data, government data, and then some of it was membership data in which only they had. So combining all of that and serving it back up to large banks. So you might think like, well, why don't they have their own? And they may, but the fact is bringing all that data together was a benefit. And so it started as a member benefit and it grew into something larger where it became a revenue stream. And so that's a great example. And the other thing I think that is the big green box on everybody's screen right now is the 80% unstructured data. And so you hear us talk about this a lot. And I'll be curious to get your thoughts, Gretchen, or any examples of what you've seen. But when people typically think of data, they think of their transactional data, things that fit into rows and columns really nicely.
Right.
And oftentimes we're not really looking at, or we haven't figured out quite how to use our unstructured data. So that might be conversations happening in our community, that might be on social media, that might be search terms in our website, all these different ways that members and non-members, prospects even, are really trying to talk to us. And I pose the question often, are we listening? And you may be going.
I think this is scary data, Julie. I think because it doesn't fit neatly into a row or column and it's hard to validate, seriously, I think people are worried about it. And so I think when you're figuring out your analytics, like unstructured data is a different type of analytics. You're looking for sentiment and themes and things that are a little bit, they're not like quantifiable calculations. And so I think it's just a different mindset and it's intimidating to people. And I think they're also worried about does this represent the entire group, or is this just a small group of people? And are we going to get influenced, get pulled the wrong way, especially with social media or community or chat? Is it situational? And so I think that's where it's really interesting if you take, these are all the attendees within a program and what they registered for and what they say they're interested in, and then what does the chat say? Like, I think those are interesting layers to put on top of each other.
Yes, exactly. It's really when you put everything together that you get that holistic view. It's not necessarily looking at just the structured or just the unstructured. I have found a lot of associations, even since the pandemic had hit, moving over to unstructured data because they really just needed to know what do our members value and has that changed, and everybody's lives and environments have changed. So certainly theirs have. So they're now really starting to pay attention to these channels and pull the data out of that to see what topics are interesting to what types of people, what geography, what demographic. And they're telling you what we've always wanted to hear, right? What's valuable to them and what they want. And so now you can do that with pulling that data together. So do you want to walk us through understanding the infrastructure and some of the really foundational pieces that you want to get into place as you start to think about data and analytics or revisiting, because it's certainly never done, data governance.
No. And data, again, this is another big scary topic that is boring. It's like any policy. I'll still tell you right now, this is not exciting work. But if you don't have a common language, then your analytics, you're going to have a hard time defining what is a fill in the blank. And the example that many people use is, what is a member? So marketing may say a member is anyone who's going to be a member, is a member, or just expired, close enough for marketing. But the membership department would break a member down into different types of membership. Finance is going to call them something totally different based on payment. So governance in 101 is just starting with the most common data that everybody uses and rule out all the assumptions. So just start with, where does our data live? Who's the owner of it? Who do we need to call to work on it? Define what these terms mean. It sounds obvious, but if you go around the office and you ask people, especially marketing, membership, finance, and events, they will give you a different definition. And so even just starting with the top 20 pieces of data that you're going to work with, or if ProTech has an analytics dashboard, or Association Analytics and Acumen has one, the data that's on these grids, you start with that. And then you want to define how you're using it. And then the last one is the data quality, which is where people get hung up. It has to be 100% accurate. We have to have audits. You know, Julie, how many people have asked you for exception reporting if all the data isn't perfect? And so I think that data quality is one where you really have to challenge yourself to say, is this a good place to spend our time? I think if I had to pick, I think you need to have a map of where your data is, and you need to define how it's used, if you had to do two. And then move into a glossary, and data, making it perfect, it would be my last one.
Yeah.
And then these are things, if you build a foundation, then when you have your quarterly meetings with your group, just check it. Is it okay? Is there more data we're collecting? Great, let's add 5 more pieces of data. This is also a really good onboarding tool when you have new staff to get to know your organization. This is a very good snapshot of a picture of all of the data that's being used. So just start, not hard.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. People get so focused on the data quality piece. And yes, the great thing about visualizations, it'll tell you exactly where to go to improve your data. And then it gives people more of an understanding all throughout the organization on why it may be important to make sure you get that correct, or get that in the right field, or whatever it may be, or why are we collecting this data? Maybe we need to be collecting something different. So it really starts different conversations whenever you start to dive into even these foundational pieces of defining.
Right. So that's a good point, Julie. Like if the data picture shows you data that is all over the place, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, what is that? And you look into it, and it's because that data was collected 5 years ago, but there was no maintenance plan, and so no one's touched it for 5 years. I would suggest that in that data quality, instead of trying to fix it, you dump it all and start over. Because there's a reason that the organization hasn't asked anyone to update that data in 5 years, or they've made it very difficult for somebody to update. There's been a lot of discussion on the association chats. How do you get people, force them or encourage them to update their profile? I won't. Like that is not something I'm going to do just because I remember. But if you find places to ask me questions so that I'm just naturally filling in my information over time, I'll do it. And so I think that's the other thing. People want to fix data, and sometimes it's not worth fixing. And you just need to start over, or say, this is information we used a couple years ago, and we need to stop being data hoarders.
All right, and then how do we go about getting started, and what's the best method, Gretchen?
Yeah, so this is a change management, which is one of my things that I talk about all the time. It's the people, not the technology, that get in the way of progress sometimes. And so this is just a change graphic that I really like, where people have something that they need to change. And there are some personal things that happen. The loss is real. So if you go after a data set, and Julie will say in a very candid way, why are you using this? This doesn't look good. This isn't serving you well. Somebody would say, well, I worked on that project. And you can take it very personally. Or someone will say, why aren't you doing something? And it's part of your job. You're like, well, shoot, I didn't know. And so there's these phases of change that you need to be aware of, and they're emotional. And so once you start to move through this cycle of change where there's a problem, you need to address it, move on, start to come into the next stage, which is being uncomfortable with the change, but keeping moving. There's a point where there's that red sliver in the danger zone where you've started to make really good progress and something will happen and you'll jump right back to the beginning. And so in data analytics projects, it is like some visualizations, you'll start to trust your information, you'll look at it differently, you'll feel really good. And then the next one is odd. And either data broke or someone made a mistake, and the people who are nervous will go, forget it, that's it. We're going right back to the beginning. So I think that's a really good thing for your team to set a good pace and look out for that problem of, especially people who are uncomfortable with this approach to analytics, that you have to trust the data. You have to build in what some of the individuals in your organization may be worried about. And risk-averse people need to have extra support to help them get through this process, because it's not perfect and sometimes it's really messy. Like, you've told me, Julie, in the middle of projects where people get really nervous, you say, you just got to get to the end. You'll see it. But push through. And so I think that's where you need to be really flexible when you're working with data, especially unstructured. So that's just a picture that you just keep in your mind. Yeah. And you will, and if you are too tight and you set your expectations too high, you will fail. And so these are some of our things that we think people get pulled off all the time, that you hear. Julie will talk about edge cases. ProTech will talk about edge cases. Like, are we at 80% good and we're chasing the 20% that will never, ever fit into a nice, neat box? So drop it. And we've talked about the perfection of data. Perfect is the enemy of done. And then the other big thing that will be a big barrier is if you don't believe the data that you see. When you visualize it, it may be a very different story than what you've been expecting. And that can be really, really uncomfortable. We lost you, Julie.
There we go. Those
Okay.
are all great points that people absolutely get hung up on. And so if you're in the middle of something, or if you're starting something, just go back to those and revisit and think, am I spending time here? And if you are, quickly move out of that area. That's the quicksand. That's the quicksand that we see people really sink.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's look at solving problems with data. So this is moving beyond the transactional data like we talked about. So we'll talk a little bit about how you solve problems in that transactional world, and then how you kind of move beyond that. So first, let's level set and talk about different types of data. Now, everybody probably deals with some type of data, either at your job, at your association, or even in your personal life. I mean, I think everybody at some point touches probably a few of these different pieces of data. So you have demographic data, so things like, especially for our members, might be gender or age. Behavioral data, this is getting more into like the online interactions we were talking about, search terms, website activity, online purchases, app usage. Psychographic, this is some of the sentiment that we're talking about, attitudes, interests, personality, values, opinions, and then contextual, so the geography, weather, time frame, season. Some of that played more of a role when we were doing in-person meetings, but even still, when you're thinking about different geographies and things people might care about, topics they might be interested in, sometimes I think people are surprised by that matters sometimes. So whenever you can really start to break things down and slice and dice in real time, you can really start to get answers to the questions you have, and ask better questions. I think that's part of it too. Sometimes we don't always know the questions, and so when we don't have something that we can look at that's real time that tells us these answers, we don't always know what questions we should be asking. And that's
or make
all
the time to adjust. Julie, like, I think people set up a campaign, and this is where automation can hurt you, is if people say, these are the 5 steps of this communication campaign, and they don't build in time to make adjustments based on what the feed, when the data starts to tell you you're going in one direction, but your campaign is taking you into another. I think you need to build in time to adjust. Yeah,
that's one of our really good case studies. I was going to say best case studies, but I think we have a few of them around how the task force really made a difference. And so, and even more recently, Case, they put together kind of a membership task force because at the beginning of the pandemic, they saw membership dropping off, and they're like, okay, this is a huge concern. That's a huge revenue driver for us. What do we do? Put together a task force and met regularly and just continued to tweak and drive forward, look at those numbers. So again, they weren't spending the time in putting together all of that information. They had it at their fingertips and were able to concentrate really on, what do we do about this? What actions are we going to take over the next 30 days? And sometimes it was, you think, even twice a month, in order to get the results we need. And luckily they were able to turn things around and get things back in a positive direction. Is it just because of those things? Probably not, but a large part of, what they attribute that to is being able to adjust quickly, like you're talking about, and pay attention to what the data was telling them. Again, accepting it. Okay, this is what it is. Let's not focus on these outliers. Let's focus on the meat of the trend and what that's telling us, and what are we going to do about it? And then let's check back in and be real with ourselves again and take those actions in the next 30 days to get to where we need to go. And that's been something that we found throughout our client base, is really this ability to act more quickly, because they have this right at their fingertips. And there was the pressure of, okay, we're really starting to scrutinize the decisions that we make, and we have to, because we now have maybe even less resources, less time, but we're actually being required to do more. How do you do that in your position at an association without some help? And that's really what data and analytics can do.
And somebody was saying, does the task force need to be sensitive to lags in data, timing issues? I think that's something to consider, but at the speed of technology now, I don't think that's as much of a factor, especially when you have integrated systems. I think you're getting pretty good response times. But I don't know, Julie, if you want, that's maybe more of a predictive question when we get to the next section.
Yeah, and I think it goes from kind of the old school mentality and ways of doing things, where we might go to IT and ask for a report. They give you a report, you look at it, and you're like, oh crap, that's like, actually now I have 17 more questions. And then you go back, or you give up because you're just tired of going back and asking for things. And it just depends on the dynamics. Point being, you might get this report and it's 2 months old. That's too old. I mean, the way that technology is available to associations at this point, you can do better for yourselves, for your organization, for the stress of your own personal job. It's much easier to perform in your position when you have the data and the tools that you need in order to make the decisions that you're expected to make. And so I think at this point, in 2021, we are in a position in the association space, even at small associations, where we can have the tools and technology to make more real-time decisions.
All right. I think go ahead, keep going.
All right, some quick wins. People are always looking at either kind of, where do I start, which we'll have some tips on that as well, or what are some quick wins? It may sound simple, but start with your biggest revenue drivers and dig in there. Put together a visualization. Evan mentioned at the beginning Microsoft Power BI. That is a great visualization tool as well. I think that's why ProTech and Acumen work so well together, is the Microsoft connection. And start to put together one-off visualizations if that's all you can do. Even if you're not a trained data scientist, you can do it. You can watch YouTube videos. You can, learn in their academy. There are so many different resources that Microsoft puts out that you can pull together some data sets, visualize something, and really show people the power of how it can change the way you make decisions by using data. Membership data is one we often see people start with, is visualizing membership data, because people are used to seeing it. They're used to knowing some sort of membership numbers. They're, at the association holistically, typically care about, if it's trade data, maybe it's more the events or sponsorship or membership data. Those are great ones to start with that are quick wins. if you're diving into more of the unstructured data, where we've seen the most success has been around the community data. And I think it's partially because it's members are, of course, talking right there, and you can pull those topics out and see the trending topics. It's relatively easy to pull together with membership data, so you have some context around that, and you can start to look at what certain member types might be talking about something, or
not talking about something, right?
Or not. And you know what? That's like our main, event coming, our main virtual event coming up in the fall is all focused on this topic. And wow, are we missing the mark? And you have to get more comfortable with making those tweaks and pivots along the way to make sure you're giving the most value to your members.
But I think this chart. Oh, go ahead, Jordan. Sorry.
No, that's it.
I was going to say, I think this chart is a good one to keep in front of you when you're trying to figure out where to start. If you're in the beginning, that maybe pick one of these in each category and just say, what is something that's low impact, easy to implement, that, like you said, Julie, get your training wheels, and then challenge yourself. Okay, what's a little bit more difficult? What's a little bit more difficult? And so even if you just start with, we're going to do one easy, medium, hard, that will help keep these projects moving. Otherwise, again, they stall at every phase unless you have a strong push to keep going.
Yeah, and then I put this one in here too, the using data at department and leadership meetings. So this is for people that might have started down this route and have some visualizations, and they're really thinking about, like, how do we continue to get this entrenched in our culture? We haven't typically been a data-guided decision-making organization. This is a very simple one that's really powerful. And then it becomes the expectation. And then that filters all the way through. And so when you walk down, pre-pandemic, when you walk down the hall at many of our customers, you see dashboards even in the lobby that are telling people exactly what their metrics are, and why am I here today? Why am I showing up at work? What am I contributing to the larger organization? Because all of this is just going to drive our mission forward. And then starting at the department meetings with, okay, what are we looking at? What do these numbers mean? Let's dive in and figure out what we need to be doing or changing in order to put into action to get us to our goals. All right, and then we talk about engagement a lot, and that's been around for a long time in the association space, means a lot of different things. But when you think about engagement, you really want to consider both those transactional and unstructured data sources, behavioral data sources, and pulling them all together to get that 360 view that you want. And then how would you, put it into action, right? So this is how would you market to each one of those segments. So you might have the most engaged. So what are you going to do for them? You might remind them of some member benefits or resources, consider separate marketing for each region or each fill in the blank. It might be demographic, it might be some other way that you're breaking down your membership. But you're certainly supposed to be or should be marketing to each one of these segments in different ways in order to get the most value out of those communications. So the least engaged appeal to those interests, outline benefits of participating in other activities. That's when you might get any of these, you might get more into the recommendation engine and really understanding exactly because they consumed this or purchased this, maybe this is right for them. And it's all about providing value. And then engaged non-members is always a good opportunity. Or maybe for you at your organization, it's not. You're getting a large revenue source off of your non-members, and you strategically planned it that way, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think this is also, you could swap out how do you market is how do you personalize to each segment. And this is where, when we talk in a few minutes about automation, and you talked about some of the Microsoft tools that are available to really help people move through a process. As you're marketing to people, you also need to make it very, very easy for people to consume and then return. And so it's definitely a cycle, but I think you could use these three categories for the whole member journey all the way through.
Absolutely. And this is one that I threw in there. I think everybody at this point has heard of the Internet of Things. I think that came about in, even the 90s, people were talking about that. And now we've really moved into this idea of the Internet of Behavior and how many more touch points people are having, even since March of last year, and how we're really consuming and using that data. So it becomes data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And when you get into the Internet of Behavior and all of the different touch points people are having, or members and non-members are having with your association, you pulling them in and actually using them takes your association from the data level to the wisdom level. And that's really exciting to start to see people do that and it really make an impact at their associations. And two of those examples, I'll talk about ASAE and then I'll throw it over to you to talk about American Health Law Association. So ASAE, a great example of this is the community data. Everybody might have chatted on Collaborate before or consumed on Collaborate, and really taking that information and seeing what topics are trending and being okay with putting on different webinar series that speak directly to those constituents. Maybe it's suggesting a community to a certain member or putting them together with another peer or peer group. It's not always about buying something at the association. It's about consuming and value to the member. And so that's something that I've seen ASAE be really successful in Acumen, is pulling that data and using it in order to influence not only their content, but their website, even their strategic planning. And so it's not always for one use. You need to think about from top level all the way down, how do we consume and put this information into action, regardless if that's transactional or behavioral.
Yeah.
You want to talk about?
Sure. And right down the street, literally, from ASAE is American Health Law Association. And they did two things in the last 18 months that I think are really interesting, is they started to look for the patterns across departments. So historically, they had membership, publications, and events and distance learning working separately. And they all were aware of member value and what members needed, but they were very focused on their day-to-day operational transactional goals, like you were talking about, Julie. And then about a year and a half ago, they started talking about forming an education group, which is an umbrella across all four, because that's, you were saying that you want people to be educated and have knowledge. And so they started to challenge their technology companies, their learning management company, ProTech, you at Association Analytics, of how do we cross these streams so that each department can still focus though on their individual, their outcomes, where the learning team still needs to deliver certain content that's different from the education team, that's different than the publications team, but how could they pull it all together to see what the member behavior is? And so that was a unique challenge, because we had to balance what every department needed to do their job every day and what analytics they were tracking in that particular focus area, because that's important. But then they needed another layer that looked across and kind of around the edges. And that's the extra insight, that they were seeing some different patterns. Like you were saying, Julie, a picture tells 1,000 words, that things popped up that they would have never seen in the singular view of members' behavior. And so now they're getting, the next more difficult conversation is they're starting to steal revenue from different departments. So people's behavior is shifting more into the learning management, and now publications is having to make some adjustments. But they're observing it as it happens, so they're able to make changes and inform people. These things are complementary. These are sets. So you don't have to do either or, you can do both.
Right.
And then they also had a huge dues model change, where they moved to a subscription-based model, where you don't have to buy individual products. Your membership entitles you to a certain set, and then you purchase after that. But I think just having that 2D view was really helpful to answer some of the questions they were guessing at.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've seen both of those things happening a lot. And then the third one, which has been kind of refreshing to see, and it might sound scary to some people, is opening up dashboards to their board. And so now kind of we're rolling everything up to an executive level. We have kind of the great thing is everybody's looking at the same thing. I don't know how many times you've showed up at the table and everybody's there with their own numbers and you spend like the whole time talking about and defending your number. It changes data from the defense to data to the offense, which is really great because you could then see and really think about how are we all rowing in the same direction? How do we fit into this larger picture? And you go about things that way rather than defending that number. And then what we've heard from the executives, turning that into a board level visualization and using the board reports and acumen, you can really start to see a change in the conversation with the board. And so it's not necessarily diving into the minutia on the operations where you maybe don't want them to be. It really is set and it pulls them to be more forward thinking. And so we've had a lot of feedback that that's been really refreshing. And you know, while it might have been a scary hurdle for some, the end result was well worth it, and maybe that anxiety wasn't worth it.
Well,
that
it depends on what you do, because boards, you know, depending on your board, but I do think this also gives boards focus. So if you do have a board that was raised on committee work where they had tasks and they had to have action, and then they move on to a board where they're still like governance only, you're not operations anymore. I think if you give them insights into specific things that the board is responsible for, it does give them assurances.
Yeah,
it's a slippery slope.
Exactly. So a couple other ways for behavioral data, then we're going to take, we're going to dive into like 5 minutes on predictive. Again, any questions that anybody's thinking about, anything you heard about a health laws journey. I know Gretchen would be happy to chime in and answer. I know it's always really good to learn from those real life case stories. So here, a couple of things. This is discussion post sentiment. So, you know, people might be saying a lot of things or posting things on Twitter. It's really great to have a sense of if that is negative, positive, or neutral. As you might think, a lot of things might come in as neutral. And so you're really looking at what are those really positive things in really negative things, and how do we focus on mitigating or putting those to use for us. And another one is community influencers and networks. So you can really start to see what people in your community might be influencers around a certain topic. That way you might tap them for speaking or some sort of education that you might want to provide or pull together, or a committee. And so again, these are great ways that you can use some of that behavioral or unstructured data at your association. So predictive analytics. So, you know, I think this is where a lot of people want to get. You certainly should think about those foundational pieces and building that foundation. And it makes it a lot easier to do predictive analytics once your data is kind of all centralized and you have it in a place, in a structure that you can pull easily the data sets and run the different models, or you can point it at a particular problem that you might have. So first, just for anybody out there that's like, what the heck is it? I've heard it, but I'm not sure. It's the practice of removing information from existing data sets in order to determine patterns that predict future outcomes and trends. So what the heck does that mean for you? This is a great example. So who will renew or who is at risk? And so when you're thinking about the likelihood of member retention, right, we always would love to know what members are going to renew and who's just absolutely not going to renew. And that's what this visual shows you right here. So these are deciles, that just means 10. The people over on the right in the green, those people are absolutely going to renew, and you can click and drill down and see who those people are. And then the people on the left are absolutely not going to renew. And the reality is you probably don't want to focus on either one of these people or the outliers towards that side. You really want to focus on this middle part and influencing their behavior in order to get them to renew. And the other thing is, if you go back to what we were talking about before around marketing, I hope you're not going to market to these people the same way. You know, the guy over here or the woman over here will hopefully receive much different messages in order to influence the behavior to get them to renew and, of course, see your retention numbers go up. Another one that people are starting to use a lot now, of course, because we have a lot more webinars going on. I think at the beginning, people thought we need to have a ton of these, we need to have a ton of content. And again, it goes back to value to that individual person. And it's not even always necessarily a persona. When you get into data, you can personalize even down to the person level, which I think ultimately is what some of us are shooting to do, because then that individual isn't going to ignore the emails, delete the emails. They're going to be getting constant value from your organization. So
I think, Julie,
yeah.
I think this is where it opens up some uncomfortable discussions that associations have, is if you're trying to stay with what a member needs and personalize and target to the individual, if the organization doesn't have the content, or either own it at the association or have it through a partner or another resource, you can lose people for that reason. So that's the other, part of an analytics, that it tells you where's your gap in your content. And again, the association does not have to be responsible for all of it, but they're coming to their association as the hub and the trusted source. And so if you're curating information both with your association and with the trusted partners in your environment, that's the other thing that analytics helps you identify, is what are the services that people need that you didn't know they wanted, and where are you spending your resources? If your resources are high cost but low consumption, then that's another tough conversation associations are having.
Yeah, that was one of the big ones, or I guess a subset of that was a big one at the beginning of the pandemic that I think everybody talks about doing, is sunsetting some of our programs and services and pointing our resources somewhere else. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we really saw a lot of people in the community going through and taking a hard look at the profitability, not just the top line, the profitability of their products and services, and making some tough decisions. And we had a group that cut 25% of their programs and services, which could be a really scary place, but data certainly gives you more confidence to make those decisions. And the result was $400,000 to their bottom line, which for them, they're not a huge organization. So that was a huge help to get through what they needed to get through.
Yep. And this is another, place that people can use the tools that you bought. The maturity of systems has grown so much, and the interconnectivity, that you can save staff time when you know that there's a certain pattern the systems should be doing more of the work for you and moving people through a process. And consumers are expecting that. I know that if you want me to get through a certain program, I want you to walk me through and help me get there, especially if it's education related, that there's 10 things I need to learn, then prompt me for the next one, because I know there are 10. Don't make me remember and have to go back and do it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes to, I think it's one of ASAE's drivers of change, letting humans be human. And I think sometimes people get scared when, technology might take away manual processes. That shouldn't be scary at all, because there is a human component that's always needed. And why not let the mundane tasks kind of be at that level of technology, and can do it much more quickly and probably less error prone, and then let the humans be human. And so that's, I think, a reminder to all of us when we're going through our daily tasks at our professions to think about, is there a tool, and sometimes is there a tool that my association already has, or a free tool out there even. It doesn't always have to be about spending dollars. Can we utilize that to make us better, faster, in order to, push our mission even further?
Right, but I think that's another plug for getting all your vendors together at least once a year, or the vendors who are heavily dependent on each other, and don't keep them apart. Bring them together and say, this is what we're doing this year. This is what our data is telling you. These are our goals. Who's the best person to do it? And it may be that two of your vendors may do the same thing, but one is better for a particular program than another. And so I think, at least I appreciate it when I know what the other people in my space are doing, so that you don't step on each other.
Absolutely. And then you get to some really cool things that take into account, machine learning and AI and, recommendation engine. It's exactly what it sounds like. We have one in Acumen, and it's feasible now. I think a lot of times people at associations or even boards might think, these things are things that Amazon does, that Netflix does, that these big, commercial companies do, but isn't necessarily always feasible to us. It is, people are doing it. The three big things are trending and popular products. So you can put that out there in front of your members and non-members. A product profile, if member A bought something, they would also like, Y and Z. And then individual profile, you could look up somebody and recommend products and services directly to that individual. So that's really exciting. I think all of these different technologies are really game changers that allow us to continue to add value and push other competitors outside of the space.
I think it cuts down on all the noise, Julie. I think people think, email is free, and it's not free. It has a cost. And the more you can personalize based on what all of the different data elements you've talked about, I appreciate as a consumer, because I'm not overwhelmed by the 20 emails every morning that I have to sift through which ones are really beneficial to me.
Exactly. So if you're sitting there thinking, what's next? I know we hit you with a lot of things. I'm sure ProTech will share this with you. Also open to having any follow-up conversations, but if we were to leave you with some kind of last tips, so start where you are and keep moving. Think about, am I at the very beginning? Should I be, maybe just entertaining the idea of putting together visualizations one-off and showing them? Start with your favorite spreadsheet. That's always a great one. I think we all have either a favorite spreadsheet as an organization, as a department, and or maybe just yourself. So start with that favorite spreadsheet, put that into a visualization and see kind of the impact of what that's telling you, and then start to ask that next better quality question. If you've kind of already done that and people are like, ooh, where'd you get that, kind of feeling around, maybe it's now time to really think about the infrastructure of a centralized repository and bringing all of that data from your ecosystem, kind of one of the slides early on, all of your source systems together into a central repository, so you can start to make those data guided decisions in your day-to-day operations. And then if you're there, something you always have to be thinking about is turning those insights into action. So it's not good enough to just have, pretty visualizations. You really have to start to think about, how am I at the organization going to contribute to these metrics? How do I pull this insight out of here into an action that we're going to take to impact our association or industry?
Yeah, and I think this is a cycle, right, Julie? So you could take something from a spreadsheet to a system to action in one area of your business, and then you go through it and you do it for the next one. So it doesn't have to be every single thing the organization does. Like you said, start with something and run it through those 3 steps, and then expand and adjust and expand and adjust. And then take things away as you add, subtract.
Yeah, right. And so any questions, you can feel free to send them directly to us. We are happy to answer anything. If anybody wants to learn any more about Acumen, please feel free to reach out. DelCor's information here as well. And I want to thank and turn it back over to ProTech for being a wonderful partner in having us today. Evan?
Yeah, thank you both for all your great insights in today's session. And it was really cool to learn about all the different things that, or think about all the different things that associations can do with all this data at their fingertips from a product like Acumen. And I just did want to remind everybody today that if you are attending, we're going to send you confirmation of your attendance in an email if you are looking for that CAE credit. And there will also be a recording in that email, which you can access anytime or share around as needed. And I also wanted to let you all know that details aren't finalized yet, but we're going to have another webinar with WebScribble in April. So keep an eye out for that. And I think that's probably about it. So unless you have any final comments, I think we're going to wrap it up.
All right. Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
See you in person very soon.
Yeah. See you guys.